Welcome. I'd like to share with you about the science of consciousness on multiple levels, the personal, the relational, global, and beyond. Despite the 7,401,682,841 people on this beautiful planet, it is very easy to feel alone and isolated. And materialists might say that we are somewhat correct in feeling that way, since our consciousness is housed in and integral to the physical brain. And that when our brain dies, that's it, our consciousness goes with it. However, there's some evidence, anecdotal and experimental, that this is not so, and that our consciousness goes far beyond the physical limitations of the brain. So doesn't it make sense for us to take a closer look at what's going on? I'd like to take you on a brief journey to look at some scientific evidence demonstrating that our consciousness is not limited to the physical brain. But first, how do we want to define consciousness? I'm going to use a pretty simple example from Wikipedia. Consciousness is a state or quality of awareness, of being aware of an external object or something within oneself, or having a sense of selfhood. And so, considering this definition within the materialistic paradigm, our consciousness is confined to being aware of an external object or something within oneself, and we couldn't perceive anything beyond that. However, humans have had a myriad of experiences that go beyond these traditional boundaries. We conducted a cross-sectional study of over 1,000 meditators from around the world. We asked them about unusual experiences they may have had during meditation. We found that most meditators had a conscious awareness beyond their own self at least once, if not many times or always. For example, 97% of our respondents acknowledged that they had an awareness of life or living presence in all things at least once. 93% had experience of pure being and pure awareness beyond the world of sense impressions. And 89% had an experience of the fusion of your personal self into a larger whole. And the list goes on. I won't read all of these, I'll just read one more. 83% had an experience of freedom from limitations of your personal self and feeling a unity or bond with what was felt to be greater than your personal self. We're also conducting a systematic review of transcendent states that show interesting results. Virtually every spiritual tradition describes an ineffable state of being that is often a goal in spiritual practice. There are numerous names for this state: oneness, samadhi, transcendence, ecstatic union. It is usually described as a state of awareness free from content, that is absorptive, unitive, undifferentiated, adaptive, and in harmony with reality. It's also accompanied by a feeling of joy and or bliss. In this systematic review, we found 35 studies demonstrating changes in subjective measures in physiology. Physiology like respiration, heart rate and heart rate variability, signals from the skin, EEG or brain waves, and fMRI or neuroimaging. These measures distinguish this transcendent state from a resting state or from control groups. So perhaps our personal consciousness does extend beyond the confines of our physical brain. And when it does, it changes our physiology. But what about the relational? If the materialistic view is true, our consciousness would be limited to our own mind and body, and we would be unable to perceive emotions, thoughts, intentions, or feelings from another person. nor would another person's thoughts, feelings, intentions, or emotions affect us. However, there's some evidence that we are in fact affected by each other's intentions. Marilyn Schlitz pioneered a paradigm that demonstrates this called DMILS, or Distant Mental Interactions Among Living Systems, where we study pairs of people. One person is the sender, and this sender is placed in a booth with a live stream closed-circuit video screen that periodically displays the other person, the receiver's image. And when the receiver's image appears, the sender sends as much energy, compassion, intention, or attention as they can towards the receiver. Meanwhile, the receiver is sitting in our 2,000-pound electrically magnetically shielded room and asked to simply relax and be open. At the same time, we're measuring both the sender and receiver's physiology. We and others have found in dozens of experiments under different conditions that the receiver's physiology changes when the sender is sending versus non-sending. And this is true for a variety of different physiological measures like electrodermal or skin conductance, heart rate, blood volume pulse, EEG or brain waves, and brain-blood oxygenation or fMRI. This effect has been replicated and numerous studies analyzed demonstrating that yes, the sender can affect the receiver at a distance and that the connection does not require any contact and appears to be instantaneous. What we're still unsure about is exactly how it works and if it's clinically effective. So considering this data, perhaps our consciousness does expand to include or interact with other people's consciousness. So we've looked at consciousness extending beyond our personal self and to another person. But what about connecting to money people or the concept of group consciousness? If the materialistic view is true, the concept of collective consciousness would be impossible, and our thoughts, emotions, sensations would be independent from events affecting other humans on the planet. However, there's evidence that collective consciousness does in fact exist. Discoveries made at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, or PAIR laboratory, have shown that consciousness and intention can influence the behavior of quantum electronic devices, known as random event generators or random number generators. Celeron, which was founded by PAIR scientists, provides tools for ongoing research and personal exploration of mind matter effects, and makes these RNGs. RNGs are these little machines that use quantum processes to generate a stream of truly random numbers, zeros and ones, at a rate about 800 bits per second. According to what we know from physics, this data stream should always be random and not deviate from that. The Global Consciousness Project, or GCP, was originally created at PAIR and is directed by Robert Nelson at Princeton, and IONS provides the logistical home. The GCP is a network of 141 RNGs all around the world, as you can see from these red dots on the map. These RNGs collect data continuously, and we can look at this data during major world events to see if the stream of zeros and ones deviate from what is expected, which is randomness. The underlying hypothesis is that if collective mind and matter are related, the data stream would be less random. That means there would be more zeros or more ones. We and other colleagues have found highly emotional global events can actually change the randomness of RNGs. The departure is small, but it's highly statistically improbable. For example, if you look at this top graph, you'll see the randomness that was measured on the events of 9/11. Here we have the first crash, the second crash, the Pentagon, the first collapse, and the second collapse. This black line here is what you would expect to see in terms of randomness, and this blue line here is a statistically significant level. So as you see through the course of the day, we end up reaching a very statistically improbable situation, meaning that this most likely would not happen just by chance, that there was such a deviation from randomness. You can also look at this other graph that shows the relative magnitude of the excursions variance over the course of a number of days. So here we have September 10th, here's September 11th, and then September 12th. Here's another example from an earthquake in Indonesia in 2006. Again, the randomness decreases significantly here, well above the statistical significance level, which is this blue line. And again, the black line is where we would expect it to be. Interestingly, these RNG deviations are not only affected by emotionally negative events, but also positive ones. Here is a graph for Peace Day in 2011. And again, you see the data collected is quite different from what you would expect. And this effect is not limited to just one event. Brian Williams did an analysis of collated GCP RNG data from 110 global harmony events that occurred between 1998 and 2012. The event had to have a theme that was aligned with a positive message of global harmony and also have a large number of participants. You see that these combined events clearly go above 0.05 and also 0.001. Down here you see that the number of events is increasing. So as more events are added to the analysis, we have greater statistical significance. So what does this mean exactly? It means that there's virtually no way that these results are due to chance, and we are seeing a real effect. That perhaps a collective consciousness is somehow impacting the physical world. Well, this data is just with 141 RNGs around the world. What if we could dramatically increase the number and collect more refined local data? Adam Curry, in collaboration with IONS and others, is taking on this research question. He's developing a personal RNG app called Entangled that could be installed on smartphones worldwide. Each person who installed this app would have access to how their consciousness affects their personal RNG, and the data would also be streamed to a project server for global analyses. The potentials for this project are quite great. So it's pretty incredible that our collective consciousness can influence RNGs. But can our consciousness affect the material world? Going back to our materialistic paradigm, if consciousness is confined to the brain, it could not possibly affect matter. And unlike this amazing toddler, we could not lift a car or anything else for that matter with our intentions. So we know that when no one is looking, quantum objects behave like a wave. But when they're observed by a human or even a machine, the quantum objects or photons behave like particles. That knowledge appears to change the behavior of our physical world. Now, this is pretty remarkable in and of itself, and many of us are still grappling with fully understanding its implications. But Dr. Radin at IONS designed a double-slit optical system to test whether our minds alone could influence quantum objects. It turns out that when people direct their attention toward the system with only their minds, the stream behaves like a particle. In other words, the quantum objects behaves just like it would if there was direct actual visual or mechanical observation. This mental attention effect is instantaneous and non-local. This means that someone thousands of miles away could direct their attention to the system, and the photon stream would behave like particles rather than a wave. This incredible experiment was originally done in 2012 with 137 people over 250 sessions. It was repeated the following year with another 250 sessions. And in 2015, there was an independent replication with the same findings. So, perhaps our consciousness does, in fact, affect the material world. So, believe it or not, we can actually take it one step further than our consciousness affecting matter. Going back to our materialistic paradigm, if we assume that it was correct that our consciousness equaled the physical brain, then our consciousness would die with our physical bodies, and there'd be no way to contact any consciousness beyond death. However, there's some evidence that perhaps we can actually reach beyond the veil of physical death, that deceased humans have channeled information to live humans that could not be known otherwise. So what is channeling exactly? It is the communication of information to or through a live human from a source other than the physical as we know it. Using rigorous triple-blind protocols, which is as rigorous as it gets because all people involved are blinded to the condition, we examined whether information channeled by 4 mediums about deceased humans was accurate. The mediums were only given the first name of a deceased person and asked 25 questions. After each question, the medium silently perceived information for 20 seconds and then responded verbally. Using a rigorous triple-blind protocol, which is as rigorous as it gets because all people involved are blinded to the condition, we examined whether information channeled by 4 mediums about deceased humans was accurate. The mediums were only given the first name of a deceased person and asked 25 questions. After each question, the mediums silently perceived information for about 20 seconds and then responded verbally about what they got. The responses were transcribed and then scored for accuracy by individuals who knew the deceased person. And you see here, 3 of them scored significantly above chance for accuracy. Using the same triple-blind protocol, the study was replicated by Gary Schwartz and team, who tested 8 mediums for accuracy. They found statistically significant higher ratings for accuracy during the intended readings versus control readings. And you see on this scale, a score of 6 was more accurate. I know these numbers are small and far from definitive, yet the experiments used incredibly rigorous methods. So while we don't know the exact mechanism for how it works, perhaps our consciousness does exist beyond our physical death and can communicate information across the veil through skilled people. So in conclusion, there's some rigorous evidence that our consciousness goes beyond our personal self, especially during meditation, that it interacts with the intentions of other people, global events, quantum matter, and disincarnate beings. In addition, there are innumerable anecdotes of these phenomena throughout time that I haven't touched on today. However, our current materialistic model or paradigm does not allow for this phenomenon to be considered valid. So doesn't it make sense that we continue to study, using systematic and rigorous scientific methods, the limits or perhaps limitlessness of our consciousness?